So you were asked to look at these examples of students who were accused of plagiarism and decide whether they were guilty or not guilty, which means they were acquitted of their crimes. So we first of all start off with Ken, who is doing a brochure. And Ken decides to use some of the information but does not cite it. So even though he's using some information, he still has to cite it, so he is guilty of his crime, and his crime would be failure to cite. So you always want to make sure that you're citing your information. So not only can you paraphrase it or put it in quotes, but you have to create that works cited page. So let's move on to Maria. Maria surfs the internet. She decides to change only the introduction paragraph, but keeps everything exactly the same. That is an example of plagiarism, so she is guilty, and basically she is guilty of fraud. She deliberately turned in somebody else's work. She changed just a tiny bit. So then we move on to Lois, who is a girl, not a boy, but Lois is writing a paper and she finds it very difficult to paraphrase. So she takes the information, she puts it in quotes, she cites the source. Awesome job, Lois, great job. So she would be acquitted or not guilty. That's exactly what you need to do. So you put things in quotes and you cite the information. So let's move on to Angie. Angie has a sister. She decides to pick the same topic. That's completely fine. She can do that. But she decides just to change her paper slightly. Maybe she takes a couple words, changes it. Maybe she changes, a couple of the details. No matter what, it is still guilty. This is an example of fraud because basically what she is doing is she is taking somebody's work and passing it off as her own. So whether that person she knows or doesn't know, it's still fraud. So let's go down a little bit further and let's look at Derek. Derek found great research, so he is paraphrasing like he's supposed to, but the way he paraphrases is just rewriting a couple synonyms. So he just changes the words for words he knows. But great job, Derek. You go ahead and you cite your information. He's using internal citations and an MLA paper at the end. But he's still guilty. He is guilty because what he is doing is called patch writing or cyber cheating. Patch writing means that it's pretty much the same, but you only change a couple words. And that is actually what most students get zeros for, is because they're doing patch writing. So let's move on to Liz. Or Lynn. Lynn is paraphrasing. She completely rewrites it. She decides she's going to cite the information like she knows that she's supposed to, so she's going to do that. And that means that she is acquitted. Good job, Lynn. So now we move on to Xavier, and Xavier is going to go ahead and paraphrase a couple some information. But he doesn't cite because he forgot to write down where he got the information. I always hate when that happens. But at least he paraphrased, right? Well, the problem is he's still guilty because even though you paraphrase, you still have to cite. So if this ever happens to you, I can teach you some strategies to find your information if you forget to cite the information. So let's move on to number 8, Lisa. Lisa writes that the North won the Civil War. So everyone knows that, right? But she doesn't cite her source. So did she plagiarize? Well, this is a tough one. This one is actually not guilty. This is actually called common knowledge. Common knowledge means that it's facts that most people know that you wouldn't research. For example, we knew that George Washington was the first president, so we wouldn't have to cite that as evidence. All right, so now we move on to number 9 with Gary. Gary's having a difficult time paraphrasing, which is kind of a hard skill. So he's going to paraphrase some of it, which is great, good job, and he's going to use the author's words for the rest. But because he used some of the words on his own, he doesn't use quotes around anything since, hey, some of it's in my own words. But he does create some internal citations at the end of his paper. So great job, Gary. But Gary, you're still guilty. Why? Because he is failing to cite. Actually, he's failing to quote. So even though you are using somebody else's words, you still need to put it in quotes. You still need to give credit. So now we move on to number 10. Amanda, she uses a lot of graphics and pictures from the internet, but she does give the websites credit. So is she guilty or is she not guilty? Well, it depends. If she is using copyright-free images, then she is not guilty. But if she's just going to Google and typing in pictures of cats and she's not checking to see if it's usable or not, then she would be guilty. But let's say that what she did was she used copyright free. So we're going to say, good job, Amanda. Keep up the good work. So now you know how to avoid plagiarism.